So why the topic investing in global equities? We at Valtros have been advising to hold a percentage of assets in global equities since inception. We did this to address the INR depreciation against the dollar, to access new technology giants and disruptions, and create lasting wealth which can be passed on to the next generation. These times have further reinforced our conviction to invest in global equities. For all these reasons and more, we feel the US market provides a viable and good solution. Just as a note, the US markets have given double-digit returns over the last 2 years and has outperformed the Nifty by a significant margin. To understand investing in the US markets, we welcome Mr. Prateek Oswal and thank him for giving us his valuable time. Prateek currently heads Motilal Oswal AMC's passive funds business. Prior to this, he was heading operations and finance at a Series A fintech startup in the Bay Area, which was backed by prominent investors such as Y Combinator, Khosla Ventures, Chicago Board of Exchange, and many others. The company provided automated wealth solutions to investment advisors and managed over 400 million in assets. Apart from tech, Prateek has experience working in investment banking, private equity, and hedge funds. So the format of this session will be as follows. Prateek will give a presentation on the US markets. Then we'll get into a discussion between my colleague Amit and Prateek, when we will address the questions which some of you have sent us beforehand. If any one of you has any question, please send them in the chat box to Valtros Capital. They will come directly to me and my team. We will work on them and send it to Amit and Prateek to discuss. Over to you, Amit. Thank you.
Thanks, Rahul. And Prateek, welcome to the session. On behalf of Valtros, the attendees, thank you for taking out the time. Much appreciated. So listen, I'm not going to delay this anymore. Why don't we start with the presentation? Then we'll open it up to questions and we can discuss specifics. So Prateek, over to you.
Thanks, thanks Amit. Thanks Aryant, and thanks Rahul for the introduction. And thank you Valtros for having me out here, present to all the investors out here. Look forward to having a great discussion, on international investing. So let me just see if I can share my presentation. All right. Can you see the slides?
Yeah, it's good, Prateek.
Okay, perfect, great. So yeah, thank you for being here. Before I start, I wanted to just talk about my experience before heading passive funds at MOMC. So I was actually, as spoken, I was in the Bay Area. I was working in a fintech startup out there, and we had around 800 to 1,000 clients, and all of them were 25 million plus in assets. So very ultra HNI customers or clients. And what I saw was, almost all of them, and this is actually all of them had between 20 to 40% allocation towards equity outside of the US, so international equity. And I saw the similar phenomena when I was studying in London and also in Hong Kong when I was doing an internship. So the concept of international diversification is actually not really, it is quite prevalent, in more sort of, I would say, evolved sort of economies. And even though it's a very niche thing out here in India, I do feel that, almost every portfolio of the next 5 to 10 years time will have some allocation towards internationals. So that is just a perspective. But also, if you look at it from the flip side, if you look at India today, if you look at Indian equity, 25 to 30% of our equity is actually owned by FIIs. If they see value in owning our equities, why can't we see value in owning theirs? So that is just a perspective, and we are seeing, so we have been running two funds, the Nasdaq and the S&P. The Nasdaq has been running for 9 years now. S&P has been quite recent, but we've seen a lot of interest from investors. We've seen very healthy flows, and we also are pitching our advisors, our investors to have a good allocation of say 10 to 15% towards international investing. And a lot of them are now sort of on the path towards sort of getting there over the next, say, 12 to 14 months time. So that was just a background. And just to give a more of a sort of informal, background about me, spend the first half of my 20s in more traditional finance, investment banking, private equity. And then the second half, I worked in tech. Hopefully I can combine the two where I am right now. So let me just start. So before I start off with the slides, let me just talk about the growth prospects and why international equity is something which we should look at. So this slide talks about, I think India and the US, two very key markets. India is obviously a very fast growing economy, one of the fastest in the globe. And you have the US, which is not as fast growing, but it is the largest economy in the world. So, and if you look at it today, India, all of us, including me, all of us have 100% of our allocations in India, and India is currently around 3 to 3.5% of global GDP market share. So we are currently missing out on 96 or 97% of wealth creation opportunities that's happening outside of India. And if you look at just adding one of our funds or any US fund, as a matter of fact, that 3.5% can jump to between 20 and 25% very instantly. So I do think that the combination is quite unique. The reason why we like the US market is because it's a more of an obvious economy to sort of invest in. A lot of US companies are based out of India as well. And it's also a very global sort of index or global funds, because a lot of the companies you see in the US have actually operations all over the world. So actually, even though you're investing in the US, you're actually getting allocation in businesses across the world. So that's the unique combination. But, how does it impact the portfolio? That is a more important piece. Why should you invest in a low growth economy? Why should you sort of, diversify from, say, an economy that's making 8.5% GDP growth, or maybe a little bit less now, to an economy that's only around 3.5%. So let's see the impact of what this has in a portfolio. But before anything else, let's see why international investing is a good diversification opportunity, which is what we've been pitching to all our investors. So today, all advisors and all investors are now looking at asset allocation as a strategy. And I think one of the tenets of asset allocation is to spread your bets, across different asset classes. So the reason why asset allocation has become a gold standard is because I guess people have realized over the last 3 or 4 decades is that you can't really time the markets. So might as well, have an allocation to everything. And I think when one asset class does poorly, the other class, like the other asset classes sort of, perform well, and make sure that your portfolio as a whole is quite stable. And international diversification in India is actually very interesting, because if you look at asset allocation, today a lot of investors are looking to diversify their equity portfolio. That means, buying debt, buying real estate, buying gold, commodities, etc. But the problem with diversification is that you're actually giving up on yields or returns for lower risk. So when you buy these other asset classes, you're actually getting lower returns as well. Whereas international diversification is one such asset class where the returns are actually not correlated. So they're uncorrelated to Indian markets. At the same time, they're actually giving you lower risk in your portfolio. So I think it's a great asset class where you can expect the same amount of returns, but also expect lower risk. Because what we've seen is that the US markets and Indian markets actually move differently. They don't move together. And also, I think when you look at the US markets, when you're buying a US fund, or you're buying a European fund or a global fund, you're actually buying two asset classes. You're buying some of the world's best companies, and you're also buying the dollar, which I'll talk about is why I think a lot of people are looking to diversify, because they want to protect themselves from rupee depreciation. So as you can see, this slide also talks about NASDAQ and S&P, which are two of the most, I would say, popular funds in the globe today. And the correlation of Indian mutual funds would be around 90%, so or more. So in fact, when people buy multiple mutual funds, they feel that they've diversified, but actually they all move together. Whereas the correlation of, say, a NASDAQ or an S&P is close to 15 to 20%, which I think is very low. And I think it does add huge value to your portfolio, which obviously I'll show in a bit. So that's diversification. And this, I think, is one of probably the most important points out there. But apart from this, there's also the currency. So when you invest internationally, you're actually buying, as I said, you're buying two asset classes. You're buying the dollar, and we all know that the rupee has lost close to 5.5% every year on average over the last decade. In fact, over the last 2 decades, it's around 3.5%. So I do think that and I think the dollar was not really important for us 10 years ago, but today I think the dollar is extremely important, because a lot of our spending is actually happening in dollar today. Unknowingly, we are spending a lot in dollars. We are buying a lot more goods and services from US companies. We are doing a lot more foreign trips, and we're also sending our kids to education institutions abroad. So I studied in the US, my undergrad 10 years ago, and if I actually went to the same school, same degree, my cost of education is maybe 2.5, 3 times what I paid 10 years ago. So when I went to college, it was say 40, 45. Today it's close to 75, 80. So I do think that having an asset class where you have 10 to 15% minimum does protect you, and also protects your, I think, purchasing power when it comes to dollar-based spending. The other, I would say, important reason is also it gives you higher returns. So if you see the chart on the right that talks about the Nasdaq in the USD versus Nasdaq in INR, and this is actually real returns. So the Motilal Oswal Nasdaq fund, went up around maybe five times in USD terms. So the US fund, the US index went up 5 times, but the fund in India went up close to 8, actually more now, 8.5 times. So I think the extra 3x is actually coming from purely rupee depreciation that has happened over the last 8-9 years. So I think dollar is very important. And I think this is one of the key reasons to why also we're seeing a lot of investors who are, I would say, going and diversifying the exposure. And this is, and I think one of the main reasons to also why people are looking to diversify is because, also I talked about consumption. I talked about consumption a very big way. Today, if I had to buy a car in India, I don't really have to go to a Maruti or say Tata Motors. I can go to Hyundai, I can go to Kia, I can go to some other brands. So a lot of our spending, as I said, is in, obviously these companies are companies we deal with on a daily basis. So I do think that, our portfolios should also evolve with the consumption patterns that we have today. And today, almost every mutual fund in India would have, say, an HDFC Bank or say even a Reliance today. I think it's good to have equally such good companies in a portfolio. And I think international diversification helps you get access to these sort of, I would say, great brands overall. Lastly, and this is an underrated point, but equally important, something not many people talk about is dividends. So in fact, going back to my experience in the US, in fact, a lot of my clients, didn't really, when they invested in, say, funds in the US, active or passive, a lot of them actually did not care about the index performance. They invested for dividends only. It's called income-based investing. And the reason why they invest for dividends is because dividend rates in the US are actually quite high. So you have guys like Coca-Cola who have 5%, 6% dividend yields every year. And especially the broad-based index like the S&P, has dividend yields of 2.5%, which I think is actually really good. Just to give you an example of what that impact would have on the portfolio. So the S&P over the last, say, 30 years, has delivered around, I would say, 11 times in terms of returns. But if you add dividends, the returns have been, or the multiplication has been 25 times. So that is the magic of dividend compounding. And I do think that, because these indexes have been around for, say, 50, 60, 70 years, you don't really see the impact until you, sort of consider dividend yield. So I do think that, if you look at these funds, you're looking at value creation through 3 sources. One is the index performance. The index does well. If the stocks perform, then obviously you do well. The second is rupee depreciation. So if the rupee continues to depreciate, which I think most people do, or at least it's a much higher probability of it depreciating in the same way it has in the past, and obviously that adds to your returns. And third is your dividend yields. 2.5% gets added back into your NAV every year. So if you combine all 3, I think you can expect decent performance. In addition to obviously lower correlation with Indian markets. And I think combine the 2, I think you're looking at, I would say, pretty good in terms of risk-adjusted returns. Also, I think US markets are less volatile than Indian markets. So if you graph the Nifty 500 and the S&P 500, you see that US markets are a lot more stable. So in a way, I think as a fund, it's a lot less volatile and a lot more stable as well. So that's basically why I think international investing is extremely important. Just to summarize, international investing, I think I have a summary slide here. Yeah, so I think number one reason is low correlation to domestic markets. I do push investors to not look at returns very strongly because the last decade has been the decade of the US market. So I think we are pitching this as an allocation strategy, not really as a strategy where you want to make 20, 25, 30% returns. I think that is a lot more important for us. And I think it's a more, I would say, easier strategy to deal with for the next 5-10 years. So number one is diversification, I think helps, it gets you some downside protection, especially when Indian markets are not performing. Second is growth. I think it gives you access to different markets, global brands. I showed a slide with, now, in fact, yesterday there was rumors of, Tesla, being added to the S&P 500, which I guess is a good thing. It was part of the NASDAQ, but now, I mean, hopefully the Tesla will be part of the S&P 500. That'll be good. And also, I think you have exposure to currency, which currently is obviously the determining factor why a lot of people are investing in at least US-based funds, because again, rupee is depreciated. If you look at wealth today, wealth is not really seen in rupee terms. Wealth is always pegged in USD. And I think it's good to have some of your wealth in USD terms. And secondly, obviously, a lot of our spending is happening in dollars. So I think it's good to have that money. For example, if you're sending your kids to, say, a US school, say 5-6 years from now, I think it's more prudent to have your investments in US, the same currency as spending, as opposed to putting everything in INR, where there might be a mismatch in goals. So that's basically, just a brief about, I would say international investing. I'll quickly spend 5 minutes on our two funds that we have. So we have the two funds that we have, at least at MOMC, are S&P 500. So which I think it's a very simple index. It's a very, I would say, it was actually just to give you a background about what the S&P 500 is. It's the world's largest mutual fund. So it manages close to, I would say, $2.5 trillion in this index, which is more than India's GDP. So I think it's a pretty important fund. It's the best gauge of how the US economy is doing. Unfortunately, I think so far, at least this year, it hasn't been. But I think it's, and people ask how the US economy is doing, they talk about the S&P 500. And also, you guys like Warren Buffett, John Bogle, Burton Malkiel, who are some of the industry stalwarts, all really like the S&P 500 a lot. What is it? It's the top 500 companies in the US. It's a purely large cap index. I would say, if you had to compare it to India, it's similar to the Nifty 100 index, which is also pure large cap index. It's giving you exposure to, I would say, between 80 to 84% of the entire US market cap in one fund. So you can play the entire economy in just one single fund. And it's also very diversified, which I think is one of the most, I would say, the best tenets of this fund is that despite tech doing really well over the last 10 years, I think tech has an exposure of 25%. The rest is equally diversified across other sectors. So, I think it makes it obviously less volatile, and also gives you some hedge against sector-specific risk. It's also not as concentrated in stocks, so the top 10 stocks are only 25% in the index. So with the S&P 500. This is a very important slide. I talked about it briefly in my presentation. So basically what it says is that 40 to 45% of its sales of the S&P 500 companies is actually coming from their operations globally. So what that means is that it's so we in fact call it maybe compliance may not allow me, but we actually call it
Hey, Pratik, you off.
Sorry, some reason I broke off. Apologies. Okay, sorry. I was so basically what I was saying is that yeah, so 40% of it. So we call it the world's large cap index. So I think it's a pretty globally diversified index. And in fact, what we've seen is that The US business is actually quite steady. A lot of their exponential growth is actually coming from their operations globally. So I think this is a good play on. I think we can all agree that American brands are a lot more accepted globally than say other brands. So I do think that next 10 years you will see this index becoming a lot more global than it is today. So I think it's a good way of playing global growth. In fact, if you see India as well, S&P 500 is a lot of these companies have huge businesses out here, operations out here, and this is similar for the Nasdaq as well. So that was the S&P. Let's come to the Nasdaq, which is another good benchmark to have. Just quickly talking about how Nasdaq is different. Nasdaq is obviously a lot more popular today because it sort of plays on a lot more of futuristic themes. Nasdaq would have a higher allocation to technology, software, hardware, telecommunications, biotechnology. So I think it has no exposure to laggards such as energy, utilities. Also, I think materials is also not part of Nasdaq, and also financial services is not part of Nasdaq. So I do think that Nasdaq is slightly more, I would say, it's more volatile. Obviously, it's sort of more sector and stocks, I would say, heavy. But it's a play on, I would say, the more futuristic trends which is happening in technology. So obviously, also the top 10 stocks have a much slightly higher weightage in the Nasdaq, where you have these companies and you have almost 53% of your investments in the top 10 stocks. In terms of valuations, so this is where I think things are obviously what we've seen at least over the last 3 months, that valuations have risen. I would say fairly bit. I do think that we've seen I think 30 to 40% growth of the index just in the last 3 months. So and honestly, I think valuations may not be the right criteria at this point of time, because valuations are normally backward looking, not forward looking. That's how they're calculated, and I think it's very hard to estimate what the forward looking valuations will be, because I think people are still to estimate what the impact of COVID will be on companies' balance sheets. So I do think that yes, valuations are slightly on the higher side, which is also why I think we are asking our investors to stagger out their payments, because we see a lot more uncertainty in the global landscape at this point of time. So that's the valuations. In terms of dividend yields, again, I spoke about high dividend yields for the S&P. Nasdaq is obviously a lot lower because I think it has a lot more stable companies. The S&P versus Nasdaq is high growth companies. So they would rather invest in their businesses as opposed to give out dividends, which you can see in the performance as well. In terms of, let's look at performance of both these funds. So this is a good gauge of, I think this is a very misleading slide because it shows, I think, I will not expect the same performance in the next decade. So I do think that, yes, performance has been phenomenal, but obviously, I think expecting the same level of performance is something which I think I wouldn't be very comfortable with, because obviously, as we know, I think performance in the past is little to the future. So I think diversification is something which is a lot more prudent as a strategy, as opposed to, I think, expecting. So if you look at Nasdaq, it has a 25% IRR every year over the last 10 years, which I think is really good. The S&P is around 18.7. This is as of May, so this would have increased, I think, in June as well. So I do think that yes, performance has been phenomenal. But I do think that the allocation strategy, as I talked about, is a lot more prudent. In fact, I do push investors to not have a small allocation, because if you have, say, a 3% or a 4% allocation, then it's just some other fund in your portfolio. It doesn't really matter. Whereas if you have a, say, 10 to 15% allocation, then you can actually sort of really take advantage of the diversification, low correlation, or dollar hedge, and it sort of percolates into the entire portfolio. So I do push on having a higher allocation, not make this one more fund in your portfolio, where it might not be as value add as an allocation strategy. Again, rolling returns have been the same. I think last slide, in terms of, I think, key differences between the two funds. This is something which investors keep asking. Obviously, the S&P is a lot more broad-based, I would say diversified. It covers all stock exchanges in the US, and it covers all sectors, less sector weightage than the Nasdaq. Whereas the Nasdaq is obviously a little bit more technology heavy. It only covers stocks that are listed on the Nasdaq, which is all sort of does not have laggards, slow moving sectors. Uh, Nasdaq covers a smaller subset, 38% of the economy, versus S&P is a lot more broad based. And obviously technology has a 40%, 47% weight, but I think it's come down now. So that was just some of the points about, I would say, international investing and the Nasdaq and the S&P. Amit, do you want to start the Q&A, or I mean, maybe we can do that, or
Yeah, we can start that if you are done. Must tell you, Pratik, to give you a heads up, we have a fairly informed investor group, so I've got
Okay.
some really interesting questions
great,
that have come
great.
up.
I look forward to it.
So let me start, Pratik. The questions I've kind of tried to break them up into broad categories, right? So let me give you a heads up on what the categories are. We've got a couple of questions under strategy, couple of questions under macro, some under research, which is actually interesting, timing that you've touched upon, and also tax, which I thought is a really good one, because I think that's something that a lot of people have questions about. But before I start, I think the one point that I really appreciated what you talked about was look at your wealth in USD terms, because really we're all global citizens, right? So we should be looking at our wealth in one currency. And while we can't diversify out of physical assets, financial assets is certainly something that we should look at from diversification. But anyway, let me get to the questions. Let me start from the macro, and then we'll kind of go from the top down. Couple of questions. Here's one question. There's a raging debate about growth versus value investing. That debate is currently happening in India as we speak. How do we see that planning out in the US?
Yeah, do you mind? Yeah, so I can share you some graphs if you like. I have some really interesting graphs on value versus growth.
Go ahead.
I think I have a presentation on US market. If you want, I can run through this. It's very detailed, but let me just skip to the value versus growth. So basically, I think what we've learned is that the value versus growth in the US has sort of, let me see if I can find it. Yes. What we've seen is that just like in India, I think growth is the one that has really performed in the US, especially over the last, say, even 10 years. As you can see, the returns of growth, it's been, say, almost double digit of value. And in fact, what is even more insightful is that if you look at the YTD returns of and this is I think the S&P 500, growth has not recovered at all. Growth fell 30%. Growth is down 30%. Whereas, value is down 30% and has stayed there, whereas growth has completely rebounded. It's back to square one. So I do think that yes, it could be an opportunity of buying value at this point of time. So value has become more value, and growth is like sort of come back to where it was. But I do think that yes, there are a lot of articles on growth versus value investing. Value is dead. But I do think that I think markets are now pricing in growth more than anything else. It has priced in growth over a long time. And I do think that if you look at growth stocks, and this is something I've mentioned many times, growth stocks have actually delivered. So if you look at last 10 years, if you look at the profitability, the ROEs, the profit margins of growth companies, they've never been higher. So if I show you the P graph of the Nasdaq index or even the S&P, in spite of the index going up 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, the P graph is actually completely flat. What that means is that all the growth that you've seen in the US of the last 10 years has happened purely because of earnings and nothing else. So growth has delivered, which is why I think growth is now is what I think investors are also looking at in terms of having a higher allocation. So I do think that markets are, I think, and value, obviously, the reason why value is because maybe value hasn't delivered in terms of earnings. So I think that's where at least I stand in terms of growth versus value. When you're looking at investing, I think it's prudent to have a bit of both in your portfolio. Because obviously it's very hard to predict what's going to happen in the future. But even if you see Warren Buffett, he used to be a value investor when he started investing, say, 2-3 decades ago, and then Charlie Munger sort of nudged him to become slightly more growth oriented. Obviously, he's still last 20 years hasn't been great for him, but still, I think whatever value creation he's had is because of the insurance business, which has been tremendously on a growth phase.
Okay, so I'll now digress to the other two macro questions. And one I think is a short-term macro and one is a long-term macro, right? I think on a short term, basically there's uncertainty in the US markets. There's the elections, there's the Fed intervention, Fed has said near zero rates for the next 2 years. There's so much liquidity coming in. What are the risks we see around this and how do we change an investing strategy? And I think you've kind of hinted to the answer, which is do your SIP kind of investing. And then the follow on to this is, from a short term, if we go to a longer, over the next 10 years, over the next decade, right? How do we look at international investing? It's probably not the right forum to look at the global outlook for the next 10 years, but just your view on how do you see the macro kind of, playing out in the short and the long term?
Yeah. So based on this, and this is based on obviously just looking at data, I think what really saved the economy the last time in the US in say 2008, 2009 crisis was I think what eventually led to a lot of companies going bankrupt is the delay in spending. And I do think that the reason why the economy recovered so sharply is because I think of the stimulus package that was announced in 2007, 2009. So I do think that I do think that and even today, if you look at one of the key reasons to why at least the markets have stayed or actually recovered is because of the excess liquidity in the system, which is obviously chasing high yielding assets. So I do think that 0% treasuries is something which I think no one has really understood the long term impact of unlimited spending. So far, I think every year, some economist talks about hyperinflation. So far, it hasn't happened. I think globally, I think let me show you a slide of money supply growth. The last and money supply growth has been there since 2003, and this is from Bloomberg. Yeah, so money supply growth has been quite consistent from 2003 onwards. So I think we haven't really seen any scenario. No one has really understood that there is no literature out there. And because the dollar is a reserve currency, I think a lot of economies like India and the US have managed to, I would say, absorb a lot of the liquidity, excess liquidity in the system. So I do think that obviously long-term consequences is something which is hard to see. But at least in the short term, I think it's a great thing because it's allowed a lot of businesses to not go under. It's allowed a lot of businesses to not lay off their employees. I think hopefully when growth comes back, then obviously then you don't have to spend as much and make sure that the economy goes on track. So I do think that last time, I think it's worked really well. That's number one. Number two, what we've seen is that the stock markets tend to, and this comes from this slide, the stock market ends up recovering before the economy recovers. So if you look at 2001 and also 2007, the economy recovered maybe 2009 and or maybe 2010, but the stock markets recovered pretty quickly. So I do think that most people who are trying to look at the broader underlying economy may not be able to. At least I think it didn't work last time. In fact, I think there were only two big investors who invested billions of dollars in 2009. That was one was Warren Buffett, obviously, and the other one was Howard Marks. So I think apart from these two, I think everyone else sort of missed the bus. So I do think that I think obviously they have seen multiple cycles in their lifetimes, but as a more I would say not as smart investor, I would say just I think doing that monthly SIP or STP or whatever it is great because ideally that 10 to 15% allocation is what everyone should have and I think trying to have it now versus later is something which I wouldn't recommend because obviously I don't know a lot of investors who manage to time markets. So I think that's just my outlook on the economy. I do think that also number two, the US is now expecting a much sharper recovery than it did in say March. I think vaccination trials are going pretty much better than what they expected. And also I think, so this is very interesting actually. So, one of my biggest issues over the last 2 months is to get analyst expectations in the US. No one wanted to give out their views on where I think companies would do. But this is actually, and this talks about ground reality, So when you talk about, I would say the media, it's all gloom and doom. Everyone is, the economy is gone. But if you look at the underlying company analysis, and this is from Bloomberg. This is primary research done by us. So around half the index is actually expecting better earnings than it did last year. So earnings upgrades, that means better earnings than expected, whereas the other half is obviously expecting downgrades. So I think, and especially if you look at technology, which is, I would say, the major index, technology, communication services, they are expecting, I would say, a lot of them are expecting better earnings. You had Satya Nadella, come out on TV, I think 2 weeks ago, and he said that he's seen 2 years of digitization happening in 2 months' time. So I think, if you look at just what companies, earnings are expected to be, yes, not great, but also not as bad as what the media is portraying.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's really why we're seeing, interesting number that we track at our end. If you look at the dividend yield of whether it's the Dow or the S&P, the dividend yield currently is about, whether it's the Dow or the S&P, it's about 4 times or 3 times what you're getting in US long-term treasury. So there is this huge flow of capital which is coming in just because of the dividend yield, which is your point, right? Because they're actually serious dividend investors. But let's now that we've covered macro, let's look at more in terms of going back to basics, right? Strategy. What are the missing gaps that global investing fills? To get into specifics, there's technology. But then also, there are some other extras. We're getting companies which are of a much larger scale, right? The size of these companies is just enormous, something we can't comprehend in this country. So what are the other things that we are getting out of, global investing? Is it just diversification, but it's also access to different companies, right? And size.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what you're getting is obviously household names, so you're getting names which I guess will have a much larger impact on the global economy than they had. In fact, you get names which are probably a lot more dependent. So we are a lot more dependent on these names today than we were pre-COVID. We're doing this call on Zoom. And in fact, I think I think a lot of companies who are now had their completely IT setup, like the servers in India and servers owned by them, are now looking to switch to AWS or Azure. So I do think that digitization is going to be a big theme, and a lot of these US companies are going to benefit a lot out of that. Obviously, I think also working from home is going to be a big deal. So I think hopefully India will see a lot more employment from global firms. I think I remember I used to when I did my hiring in the Bay Area, like a starting salary of an engineer was $150,000, whereas the same quality engineer in India would have been maybe 1/5 or maybe 1/6. So I do think that hopefully India also gets good response out of all this. But I think overall, I think what we've seen is that our dependence on US companies have gone up a lot post-COVID. And also, I think you're getting a lot more than just, I think most people just talk about FANGs. Let me show you what else you're getting apart from the FANGs. So this is very interesting data. This talks about NASDAQ, the sector concentration before and after, I think before the crash happened and today. And as you can see, actually, if you see technology, you all talk about FANGs, but FANGs have actually are less prominent than they were pre-COVID. So in fact, the biggest beneficiary of COVID has been consumer discretionary. So which I think is, I mean, I had no idea.
A lot of people would not expect that, right?
Even I didn't expect that at all. So the diversification that you're getting, so I think if you look at financial services, it's completely crashed for the S&P, lost 1.5%. But obviously, I think, so I think number one, having a diversified index or diversified fund makes sense. But number two, I think you're getting a lot more than just the FANGs. You're getting some really good consumer companies. I think healthcare is obviously a top notch. So I do think that, that it's a lot more than just, I think most people talk about, Netflix, Amazon, Facebook, but I do think that you're getting a lot more than just, I would say, the companies that are on top of your list.
Yeah, that kind of, leads to, it's a brilliant question, actually. Do we need to think of a different risk matrix, or do we invest on the basis that both US and Indian equities carry the same inherent risk? And clearly the market size is one which, reduces the risk significantly, but just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I would say, risk in terms of numbers, so I wish I could show you so correlation of 20% is something which is very hard for us to fathom. It's very hard to
Yep.
understand what is correlation of, of 1.7 of 20%. But if you look at if you just chart the 10-year, the last 15-year calendar performance of the Nifty 500, which is the entire 96% of India's equity, and the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq, you'll see that there's a huge difference between calendar returns of these two markets. In fact, I think a big insight that I've learned is that the markets are not very correlated, but what makes it uncorrelated is actually buying the dollar. So just to expand on that, the correlation between Indian markets and US markets are around 40-45%, but the correlation between the Indian markets and the rupee, the USD rupee, is negative 30%. So when you add those two up, that goes down to 15-20%. So I do think that I think people tend to underestimate the impact of the dollar USD as an asset class that you're buying along with these quality companies. So when you add those two together, you're actually getting a very uncorrelated asset, which I think reduces your risk dramatically. You're adding two asset classes which you never had, while I think expecting the same amount of returns.
Okay. So, but let me, I'm just going to digress to strategy because, after some time, because fundamental questions. How does an investor educate themselves on global markets? Quite simply, are there any readily available tools? Because, the universe that we have on this call are fairly sophisticated investors and they'd like to do their research as well.
Right.
So
I would say, I would say the quality of, I would say, the news that you would expect in the US is a lot better. It's,
yes.
It's just, if you look at the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, if you look at, you're looking at data that is, so I just recently subscribed to the Wall Street Journal, I would say last week, and I've just been blown away by the quality of research and the quality of news that they're delivering. So that helps me keep track of the markets really well. Apart from that, I'll be honest, I think it depends on how detailed you want to be. But I do think that apart from, I would say, yes, obviously being in touch with news, I think investing in it is a lot simpler, because the news is irrelevant in the long run. So just to give an example, like the Indian indexes, Nifty 50, Nifty 50 used to be, I don't know, like in 2004 used to be like industrials, like, I don't know, engineering materials, capital goods. And today the Nifty is what? Financial services heavy. Tomorrow it might be media or maybe telecom or something else, So I think the beauty about long-term investing is that you don't, obviously it's important to understand the macro and micro, but long-term investing means you should not, obviously, I think as long as you hold the best possible assets, you really don't have to do a lot of thinking behind, I think, why you should invest. I think if you're looking at pure diversification, then I do think that this is a pretty good market to at least start off a diversification needs. But yeah, honestly, that's how. So I've also lived in the US, so I've seen the economy grow and all of that. So it makes it easier for me to obviously talk about some of the specifics. But I do think that reading up really makes a big difference, especially at the US economy.
Okay, well, that kind of, it's not, actually it's really simple at the end of it all, right?
Yeah, investing is it's simple, but I think it's hard for most people because of the volatility. I think the behavioral is something which I think the process is just 10%, behavioral is 90%. So I think
interesting one, and this is no longer research, but you recommended that a lot of investors should be investing over time,
yes.
to just average. A, how does the investor hedge if they need to? And B, what do they do with their spare cash?
Yeah, it's a good question. So ideally, so coming again from behavioral, I think one of the big issues, and this is this is from my experience, very very small experience, but what I've seen is that people tend to overinvest in bull markets and underinvest in bear markets, and it's partly to do with obviously a lot of business owners. Their liquidity tends to be the highest when everything is doing well, So I think, and the liquidity tends to be the lowest. In fact, they need liquidity when markets are bad. So I do think that a staggered way is something which is quite sustainable. So if you're looking to allocate 15, 20%, or maybe 10% of your investing into US markets, a staggered way is something which I would really recommend doing, as opposed to doing all in at this point of time. Number one, and number two, also when you're looking at adding an asset class to your portfolio, at least what we've seen from research is that you shouldn't really add an asset class at one go. You should ideally add it in sort of phases, because what happens is then your sort of your asset class mix ends up not really optimal. And number two, I think you may end up maybe not timing or whatever. I mean, you might be end up taking a higher risk than you would have otherwise. So I think looking at those two, we are recommending investors to obviously stagger out their in that diversification over 8 to 12 months time. In fact, I mean, on both our funds that we have a lot of SIPs, a lot of STPs set up. So I think, and even I think looking at the macroeconomic environment right now, unemployment is actually quite high in the US. So I think most people don't talk about unemployment, but let me show you a graph on unemployment. It's been the highest since 1947. Yeah, look at this. So yeah, so I think most people don't talk about this, but unemployment is actually still quite high. Obviously, we have seen some reversal, which I think is a great sign, but it's I would say 30% higher than what it was in 2000, 2009. So I think macroeconomic scenario is still, I would say, very uncertain. And I think this unemployment is something which we should watch out for, at least over the next few months. So which is why I think, a staggered strategy might make a lot more sense given the uncertainty in this market.
This one's just come in. Given our view on the macro, given the uncertainty, worth any exposure for Indian investors to play in the international bond market, the US bond market? I have my views, but I'd love to hear yours.
I mean, at 0% rates, I think you're pretty much buying the currency and nothing else.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So unless you want to time the interest rate curve by a 10-year or 20-year or 30-year bond, you have a view that interest rates will rise or something like that, which I mean, so far, I think the Fed's view is that interest rates will be low till 2022. So that's at least what the Fed has, at least they want to keep it low to 2022. So I do think that, yes, if people want to take advantage of the term structure, which I think I'm not really the most knowledgeable person on that, but essentially I think you're buying treasuries means you're buying 0% coupon bonds where you're buying the currency. So I mean, your money is better off in, say, buying dollars as opposed to just buying bonds.
Yeah, no, I think we're on the same page on that. What else? I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to jump into taxation, and then I'm going to go back because there is a long list of questions. I want to make sure I don't miss out on that. So what are the tax implications? How does taxation work?
Yes. Yeah. So tax is actually very important. It's I feel bad not covering it earlier. But basically, so all international funds in India are taxed as debt, not as equity. So even if you invest in even if you invest directly or indirectly through a mutual fund in India, you will be taxed as debt, which is according to your slab rate. Having said that, if you're looking at long-term investing, long-term investments, say 3 years plus, then tax is not really relevant because you can take benefits of indexation.
Prateek, I think we've lost you. So I guess we'll just wait for 10 seconds. Aryan, can you? I think Prateek is going to reconnect. Yeah, sorry, we lost you, Prateek. You're on mute.
Yeah,
Yep.
sorry.
Now you're on.
Yeah, apologies. It's never happened. I don't know
No,
what's
no, it's
wrong.
okay. Don't
Anyway,
worry.
yeah. So taxation, I was saying that it's essentially if you are looking at as a long term. In fact, I wouldn't recommend this fund if someone's take a call on the short term. But if you are looking at as an allocation strategy, then I think tax may not be relevant because post 3 years you can expect tax to be similar to equity levels, and it will go down after that as well. So I think that is we are.
I think we're having, yeah, okay, sorry. Prateek, lost your last 10 seconds.
Sorry, I missed that. Let me just
Alright.
put my video off.
Yeah.
Apologies. I will just put it off. It might be make my connection more stable.
Yeah, Prateek.
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
here.
So,
Yes, okay, much
yeah.
better.
So sorry, we did lose the tax bit again. So just a quick last 1 minute on tax.
Yeah. Basically, as I said, taxes may not be for someone who's investing for a very long time, say 3 years plus. It's of indexation. So tax rates basically over 3 years are 20% indexation. So I think if you hold it for 3 years, and it goes down to close to equity levels. Obviously, the longer you hold it, the lower your tax outlay will be. So that's where basically where taxes so I do think that anyone looking at this from a 3 years plus perspective, I think for them tax may not be as relevant a discussion.
Okay. And before we close, there are a host of questions, but are basically all around the same issues of valuation. So I'm just going to rattle off a few, and then you can give me your views because I think we're almost out of time as well. Technology stocks have run up quite a bit. They've generated 50% plus returns. Scripts like Zoom have had major tailwinds. How sustainable is this going forward? What happens if we see a Trump, given Trump is probably not going to come back, and if Biden comes to power, what happens? We are seeing investors, value investors like Buffett, Mueller, they're all kind of not very aggressively investing in the market. I guess the obvious answer to this is staggered deployment, but are there any short-term sector plays? Should we kind of do pharma, big tech, and then kind of go on to other stocks? What's the general view on market volatility across sectors, and the best strategy to play it? I think that's a good way of kind of closing things also.
Yeah, that's a great question. In terms of, I think market short-term views, I think the markets are expecting the tech companies to deliver big over the next few years. So I do think that if they do not perform in terms of expectations, then there might be, I would say, obviously there will be some disappointment out there. So I do think that the markets currently are expecting or have high expectations of at least tech stocks, the FANG stocks, which are now become large companies. I think you have companies worth 1 trillion, 1.5 trillion. So I do think that yes, expectations are running high, which is why obviously. But in some way, I think we're also seeing on the ground, there is a lot more hiring happening. There's a lot more investment happening in these companies, and also earnings is expected to be better than expected, at least from what the analysts are saying. So I think at least in the short term, we're seeing earnings to be relatively better than what we expected in March, which is why the markets have recovered. And long term, it's supposed to be a lot better, depending on, I think that's based on how dependent we are. So that's in terms of tech. In terms of, themes, I obviously, in terms of pharma and tech, the problem with investing in themes, and this is a behavioral issue again, is that people end up buying themes when it's most popular, when valuations are the highest. So people end up buying pharma stocks, post I think post pharma has run up by 20, 30, 40%. And the same goes with other sector themes. So I do think that when people are investing in sectors, I do think sectors come in between stocks and diversified mutual funds. So if someone wants to take a directional bet, which requires some bit of timing, then obviously sectors make sense. But if you're not looking to bet on a particular sector or a set of stocks, also diversification with sector themes, there is not a lot of diversification out there. It's all one way up or one way down. So I think in terms of not getting your timing wrong, I do think diversified mutual funds are the way to go. I think if you look at the last 4 or 5 decades, it's diversified mutual funds that have actually created the most amount of value for people. So at least I'm biased against sectors and themes. But obviously, if someone wants to take a directional bet, then obviously it makes sense. But to have sectors as a long-term, I would say, long-term investment, it requires you to have a slightly higher threshold for volatility, and you have to agree that I have to get the timing right at some point.
I guess the only thing that and I have a comment on this that somebody's just said is basically you can play the sector theme in India just as well. It's just that if you're looking at the US, there are various sectors that you can participate, themes of which you cannot play in India, for example, tech. But having said that, the point that you made, India is 3.5% of global GDP, right? So you get to participate in the balance 96, 97%. So listen, Prateek, any closing words? Otherwise, I think I'm conscious about your time. We've gone beyond 6. Last words, and then I guess we can close this. If anybody has any other questions, please do let us know. We promise we'll get back to you, and we can always pick Prateek's brain subsequently.
Yeah. I mean, firstly, thank you for having me, and I mean, I'll be more than happy to come again. I think we've had some really interesting questions, and I'm pretty sure I can go on for a much longer time. But I think overall, I think as I would say, even coming back to sectors, you're getting some diversification there as well, because India's financial services, the US is more consumer and tech, so you're getting some diversification there as well. Which I think, could be relevant, could not, but that's also one theme which is, I think, great, because not both economies are having the same heavyweights, which could be a good thing. But overall, I think just to sum up my presentation today, I've been pushing, I think diversification quite heavily, and I hope a lot of investors, I think, do it for diversification. I think that is the right way to look at, I think, international investing. And that's number one. Number two, I think in terms of asset allocation, I think, this is a great thing to have in your portfolio. Global investors are doing it. I think I had clients who were endowments of universities, and they also had a heavy exposure towards equity outside. Obviously, I think if you look at global diversification, also, I think US has been a standout. If you look at emerging markets, have been quite disappointing. Even Europe and Japan has been quite disappointing over the last decade. So I do think that the US has been a standout. So this, I would say that that is something which investors should keep in mind. Having said that, I do recommend having a more global approach. Maybe having some bit of money in Europe and Japan, maybe some in emerging markets, so get to play around, and it adds more diversification, because next 10 years you can't really know what theme will play out, but it's good to participate in each of them. So I think that's typically how I would sum my presentation today, and happy to answer any questions. If you have any more questions, happy to be here and answer them.
Yeah, no, Prateek, I think we're done. If there is something, I will get back to you on something more specific. Rahul, are we okay? Are we good to close?
Yeah, I think we are good to go. Thank you so much, Prateek. Really appreciate the time you've given us, and thank you for answering the question. And thank you, Amit. I think this has been a good session, and thank you to all our participants. And as Amit said, if you guys have any questions, please do reach out to us, and we'll answer it, and we'll get Prateek's inputs also on them.
Yeah. Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Amit, and thank you, Aryan, for having me. And look forward to engaging more with all of you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Super. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.